So for those who came here from my original channel, you probably know that I'm a huge fan of monkey's paws. A monkey's paw is the idea that you can get your wish, but there's gonna be some caveat. I got my wish of being able to be a streamer. The caveat was people keep gender bending me in fan art, so here we are on this avatar. You, Havoc the Wendigo, in the comments section, asked for the 6th Doctor and Clara Oswald. Clara Oswald doesn't work with 6th Doctor's ability, so we're actually going to be building a completely different deck. But it is going to be a 6th Doctor deck, as you requested. So let's talk about him and then talk about the monkey's paw that's happening. So, he's a 6-mana beefy commander who says whenever you cast a historic spell, copy it, except the copy is not legendary. This ability only triggers once per turn. Now, generally speaking, you would run this for a legendary matters type commander, spamming out creatures who ought not exist on the board with other copies of themselves. However, we're not playing Legendary Tribal today. We're playing something entirely different based entirely on bringing this guy in. Do you see his name? Do you see his effect? None of that matters for what we're doing today. We have another $15 deck where the commanders combined do not even equal $1, and the 99 of the deck equals $15 or less. Vizsla Turlo is here to be a draw engine when we need it, a bad gift for somebody else when we don't need it. But what he's really here for, more than anything, is to enable the actual strategy of the deck that we are going with today. That's right, everybody. You thought it was a Doctor Who deck. Nope, it's just Necrons. It is just a Necrons deck the entire way through. Let's talk about Doctor Who Necrons and why we are building them today. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at our ramp section of the deck. It is 15 cards deep. And before we get into it, let's talk about why Necrons. Necrons benefit from swarming the board. They really like to pump out tons and tons of tokens, tons and tons of versions of themselves. They like having lots of things on the board. So what's better than having 1 of every Necron in your deck than having 2 of every Necron in your deck? Let's talk about how this deck is going to function. First of all, looking at the mana section, we have Scampering Surveyor. Grab any land from our basic land from our library, put it onto the battlefield. If our commander's out, we get 2 of them. For the remainder of the cards in the deck, remember, when I say the card, if our commander is out, we get 2 of them, which is why all of our ramp is artifact based, and 61 of the cards in our deck are all artifacts. Unstable Obelisk lets us blow up cards while also being a ramp spell. Mirror Convert is a 2-mana rock on a creature. Command Sphere lets us draw a card when we sack it. It can also be used for any color. Charcoal Diamond and Moss Diamond, Fractured Power Stone, and Sky Diamond all have the benefit of being easy to play 2-mana rocks. Hedron Archive has the benefit of letting us draw cards from it later, while also being a huge acceleration piece to get our commander out on the board quick. Wayfarer's Bauble lets us get a land out of our deck like Scampering Surveyor does, except it comes out way earlier. Bonder's Ornament gets to be a draw card for our deck, while also being a very, very okay 3-mana rock. Our first few turns, we're just going to be ramping. And then remember, if we have to ramp on later turns, we're going to be cloning the mana rocks. We're actually okay having a lot of mana rocks, and you'll see why here in a bit. And then we have Honored Heirloom. This lets us get 1 mana of any color. It also allows us to tell reanimation players to stop playing their decks because they don't need to be running as many cards in their graveyard. We get to control the cards in their graveyard. We are the ones who control that, not them. Anyway, Mind Stone doubles as a draw card later in the game. It also adds a colorless mana. Ornithopter of Paradise gets us a mana of any color for 2 mana. And finally, Sad Robot. He is a ramp card while also giving us a draw later in the game if we need him to. So let's go ahead and talk about the draw section, because I really want to talk about these Necrons, but first you need to know how we're going to be getting ourselves stabilized for the deck. Let's start out with Mirror of Galadriel. We can pay 2 mana to get it on the board, and then we can scry 1 and draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for every legendary creature we control. Now, this is a legendary card in and of itself. It's also an artifact, so it will benefit from our commander's ability. And because we have legendary creatures in the deck that our commander can copy, we actually have a pretty high chance of having a low-cost Mirror of Galadriel ability for when we are later in the game and running out of cards in our deck. Then we have Brainstone. It's just brainstorm on a stone. Fairly simple. It's even better when we can copy it. Skyscanner, when it enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. So when our commander's out, we get to draw 2. Matsalanti the Great Door. This card is amazing in this deck. It's a Merfolk Looter. We can draw a card and discard a card with its ability, and then we can pay 4 to transform it into the core, which allows us to add mana of any one color, where X is the amount of permanents in our graveyard. You're gonna see why nobody is going to want us to have this card open later on in the deck. Then we have Research Thief. It's got flash and flying, and if an artifact creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. We are a Necron deck. We'll have lots of artifact creatures on the board. Somebody's getting through. The Everflowing Well lets us mill 2 and draw 2 when it comes out, which benefits our Necrons a lot. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanents in our graveyard, we get to transform it into this lovely land. When you cast a permanent spell using mana produced from the myriad pools, up to 1 target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell. That's right, we're not just copying cards when we cast them. With our commander, we're also going to create more copies on the board, which will matter when you start seeing some of the creatures we have access to that we're going to want to have multiple of on a given board. Then we have the Silent King. He's got flying and my will be done. Whenever he attacks, we mill 3 and then place an artifact creature or a vehicle card from among those into our hand. The deck runs 27 artifact creatures and a handful of vehicles as well, so the likelihood of us hitting this will hit 1 about every 1 or 2 swings with him, which means we'll always hit at least 1 because we're copying this card with our commander. Then we have Thopter Spy Network at the beginning of your upkeep. If you control an artifact, make a colorless Thopter token that has flying. Whenever one of your artifact creatures hits a player, get to draw a card. Then we have Bident of Thassa. Whenever one of our creatures hits a player, we draw a card. And Thought Monitor. It's got affinity for artifacts. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we draw 2 cards. It's also a flyer. So cool thing about Thought Monitor, our commander says we're going to pay 1 mana and we're just going to draw 4 cards with this guy. And because it's got flying, you'll see why that matters here soon. I'll keep that one a secret. And then we've got Weatherlight. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library, place a historic card from among them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Again, we are a deck with 61 historic cards. We will always hit something with Weatherlight, and if our commander's out, we're probably hitting them with 2 Weatherlights. Now, that's the way we're going to be getting through our deck. Let's talk about the actual deck's strategy. What are we going to be doing? What is our plan? Well, if you take a look at our token section, we have 6 cards, and then we have a win con section down here, which we'll get into in a second. These cards all spawn tokens for us in a variety of flavors. Let's look at Imatech. Anytime an artifact leaves our graveyard, create 2/2/2 Necrons. At the beginning of combat, another artifact creature gets 2/2 and gains menace until end of turn. That last ability doesn't matter for us too much. What we care about more is the fact that this guy is going to be just spawning us tokens and tokens and tokens. Mirror Battlesphere, when it ETBs, create 4 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature tokens. Whenever you swing with the Mirror Battlesphere, you may tap X untapped mirror you control. He gains plus XO and then burns somebody for X damage. So if we play this with our commander, we will get 8 mirrors, and the first time it swings, we will deal 8 damage to a person while also clubbing them in the face with a creature that has a power of 12. The Mirror Battlesphere is good in Blink decks. It's good in copy decks. If you have not played Mirror Battlesphere before, this is a fun card. Then we have Necron Monolith. It is a crew 4 vehicle. It has flying and indestructible. If it attacks, we mill 3 cards. For every creature we mill, we get to create a 2/2 Necron Warrior token. Because, again, we have 27 creatures in the deck. So mathematically, it is likely that we will hit 1 creature every time we swing with the Necron Monolith, so we'll always be spawning a token every swing or 2, or if we get lucky, we'll be spawning multiple in a single run. Then we have Royal Warden. When it enters the battlefield, create 2/2/2 Necrons, and we have Unearth on it as well, so we can play it from the graveyard later in the game. Then we have Night Scythe. When it enters the battlefield, we create a 2/2 Necron Warrior creature token. Remember, if our commander is out, we are actually creating 4 tokens. 4 tokens, 2 tokens, 8 tokens. We're copying these, but let's go ahead and talk about the big boy. The reason why Matsalanti the Door is giving us all of that extra mana late in the game. May I introduce you to a lovely card called Their Number is Legion. You create X tapped 2/2 black Necron artifact creature tokens, and then you gain life equal to the number of artifacts you control, and then you exile Their Number is Legion. You also can cast it from your grave, so if you mill it, you just cast it from there. Because we have a lot of mill in the deck, we are likely going to be casting this card and getting 10 to 12 Necron creature tokens when we play this very, very easily. Like, we're going to get a bunch of cards off of this, and this card is going to likely be in our graveyard in most games. Now, why are we making all those tokens? Why possibly would we be doing that? Well, let's look at the way the deck's going to win. It's got 3 huge surprise oops I wins, and remember, because these can be cloned, well, remember how I said the Thopter having flying mattered? Let me introduce you to this little card called Nettlecyst. Equipped creature gets 1/1 for every artifact and enchantment we control. Remember, we're going to have 2 of these out because of our commander. So if we've got 10 or if we got 15 artifacts on the board, which is very, very likely because the Necron creature tokens are artifacts, Nettlecyst is giving something like our Thopters +30/+30 when we clone it with our commander. Then we have Cranial Plating, which gives 1/0 for every artifact we control. Again, we're cloning this card with our commander, so we are going to have a ton of free damage on the board. And if we are not able to swing at somebody for whatever reason, there's plenty of reasons you might not be able to kill somebody that way, we have the Necron Overlord. Pay X mana and tap X untapped artifact we control. Target opponent loses X life. I told you that that extra mana we have from the Mozzolante door is going to come in handy. We're probably going to be spending it on this effect more often than not. We're just going to go ahead and hit somebody for a lot of damage and then burn the table for 10, 20. Unfortunately, the Necron Overlord doesn't benefit directly from the cloning effect in the deck, but he does benefit from having cloned artifacts on the board. We also have 2 major sack outlets in the deck that, remember, we do have the ability to clone. One is one of my favorite cards in Magic, Trading Post. We can use it to discard cards and gain life. We can use it to pay life and make tokens. We can use it to sack a creature and get artifacts from our graveyard to our hand, or we can sack artifacts to draw cards. This card does everything for us. It's amazing. And then we have Chronomancer. We can pay 1 and sack an artifact to draw a card. It's also got flying, and remember, because these are both artifacts, we have the ability to clone them with our commander for free. But let's go ahead and now look at the removal package in the deck. It's a fairly deep removal package. Universal Solvent, pay 1 mana, drop it on the board. We can pay 7 and blow it up to blow up any permanent. Again, we're spawning multiples of these with our commander. Goblin Firebomb, it's just the same card, but it has flash. It's literally just power corrupt Universal Solvent. Meteor Golem, when it enters the battlefield, blow up any non-land permanent and opponent controls. Disruption Protocol, counter any target spell. We can also tap an artifact to lower its cost by 1. Executioner's Capsule. This lets us sacrifice it to blow up any non-black creature. We have a single negate as a secondary counterspell in the deck, counter any non-creature spell. The Locust Heavy Destroyer makes everybody sack a creature. Spine of Isha, whenever it enters the battlefield, blow up a permanent. Transmogrifying Wand, when it enters the battlefield, it gets 3 counters, and then we can tap it and use one of its counters to blow up any creature and replace it with a 2/4 White Ox. This card is wonderful when we can play 2 of them at once and immediately knock out 2 creatures every single turn until it runs out. But even when the Transmogrifying Wand is out of charges, we're not out of plays because it just being on the board benefits things like Cranial Plating. Then we have Steel Hellkite. When it swings, we can pay X and destroy every non-land permanent with mana value X opponent controls. The Dalek Drone, it's an artifact creature that blows up a creature when it comes out. Stone of Eric, a way to just make sure that players do not get to reanimate cards from their grave, or we can sack it to blow up a person's entire graveyard. Necron Deathmark comes into play and blows up a target creature a player controls, and then we can make a person build 3 cards. Usually this is going to be us. And then we have Noxious Gear Hulk, a 5/4 menace creature that blows up creature when it enters the battlefield. The next thing we need to talk about is the way we are going to be getting most of our artifacts back. Now, Trading Post does a little bit of that work for us, but we want other ways to do it. So let's look at the Dross Spellbomb. We can sacrifice it to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand and then draw a card. We could also just sack it to draw a card, but we want to probably spare this as a card we're going to use to get things back. And remember, like with everything else in the deck, we clone this with our commander. Then we have Ghost Arc. Whenever it becomes crewed, each artifact creature in our graveyard gets unearthed 3, so we get a chance to play them from our grave. And then we get Cryptek. We can pay 2 and tap it. Another artifact creature we control will revive itself if it dies this turn, so we can make a creature with Cryptek come back at the end of the turn, and then sack it with Trading Post. So here's a fun one you can do. You've got a creature like Necron Deathmark. You're already doubling up on its effect because of our commander blowing up multiple cards, and then we go, hey, I'm going to sacrifice it with Trading Post, but before I do that, I'm going to have Cryptek make the card come right back onto the board. So now the creature's going to die, come back, blow up another thing, mill us more, get us closer to that end game. And then we have Technomancer. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards and return any number of artifact creatures from our graveyard that have mana value 6 or less to the battlefield. Now that's total mana value, so you can't get like Cryptek and another card that costs 3, but you can get Cryptek and another card that costs 2 as an example. Then we have Altar of Baal. We can pay 2 to put it on the board, pay 3 to tap it and exile a creature we control, and then get any creature from our graveyard onto the battlefield at sorcery speed. This card is wonderful with our Necron tokens. We just play it, get rid of a token we don't need, and get one of our big boys back out. Big boys like Anakir the Traveler. Whenever it attacks, you may cast an artifact spell from your hand or graveyard by paying life equal to its mana cost instead of paying its mana cost. So this is one of our most constant ways of getting our important artifacts back. The second one is the Scrap Trawler. Anytime it or another artifact is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card from your graveyard with lesser mana value. Now, there is a reason that this card is in the deck. Aside from the fact that we're going to be killing our own artifacts a lot, but even our cards, like the Dross Spellbomb that cost 1, we actually have a really important piece of tech in the deck that we're going to be abusing with Scrap Trawler. Let's move to the protection part of the deck. We have 2 cards in the deck dedicated to protecting, and one of them is Welding Jar. We sacrifice it to regenerate any artifacts. We can use this to protect our commander, not our commander, but any of our important cards from a board wipe. We can also use this to make sure that when we are trying to blow up a bunch of cards on the board, we do not get affected by that. In combat, our creatures can be saved by this. The most important part of Welding Jar, though, for this deck is that it is a 0 mana card. So we're going to play this with our commander out. We're going to always keep that copy on the board as an insurance policy, and we're going to sacrifice the original Welding Jar so it can stay in our graveyard as long as possible, so that even if we get rid of a 1 mana card, Scrap Trawler will see that there is a 0 mana card in our grave that we can in fact get with its ability. Welding Jar is going to put in a lot of work for us, but we do need to be able to protect our commander, and we have 1 card that does that too. Giant's Amulet, pay 1 and equip it for 2, give a creature hexproof as long as it's untapped. We're never swinging with our commander, so this card is going to be making sure our commander is nice and pretty, nice and safe. And remember, like with everything else, we clone it with the commander. But there's another card that benefits from us putting a bunch of artifacts in the grave, and that is Tazen the Infinite. As long as it is on the battlefield, it has the activated abilities of all the artifact cards in your graveyard. He is your Unstable Obelisk. He can blow himself up to kill cards. He is any other card in your deck that you need him to be. He gets to be Cryptek. He gets to make sure that your cards come back over and over and over again. He gets to be Chronomancer. He gets to be a sack outlet when you need him to be. He's got your activated abilities. Abuse that as you can. You're milling all kinds of stuff into your grave, so don't forget that you've got artifact activated abilities in your grave. He can be. If you've got a Mana Rock in your grave, he is your Mana Rock. He can tap for mana for you if you need him to be. But more importantly than anything else, he can be this thing. He can be Oblivion Stone. Oblivion Stone puts a fate counter on a permanent, and then we can sack it by paying 5 to blow up every non-land permanent with a fate counter on it. So here's what we're going to be doing. 1 Oblivion Stone is plenty, but with our commander, we get 2 Oblivion Stones. So we're going to make sure that 1 Oblivion Stone puts a fate counter on the other, so we have 2 board wipes always available. And then if we run out of Oblivion Stones, we just play Tazen the Infinite, and he is himself also an Oblivion Stone. It's what he's there for. It's what he's good at. He is a wonderful card in a deck like this, and I adore him greatly. But that's basically everything in the deck except for the land base, and let's talk about that land base real quick. First off, we have 6 fetching lands. We have Myriad Landscape, Shire Terrace, Ash Barrens, Evolving Wilds, Promising Vein, and Terramorphic Expanse as ways to get any color mana we need out of our deck. Though, mind you, this deck is almost all black with a hint of blue and green on the commander, so grab the correct lands accordingly. Then we have our dual land section with something a little special that we don't normally put in decks. We have some tap lands in here. The Mistvault Bridge, the Tanglepool Bridge, and the Dark Moss Bridge all are dual lands that are artifact lands, so they count towards our artifact count when we are trying to win the game with things like cranial plating. We also have Vine Glimmer Snarl and Choked Estuary as reveal lands, Dark Water Catacombs, and Sunken Hollow as our other ways of having dual lands. Note that we're not leaning very heavy on green in our dual lands because we just don't have that much need for the green. As such, we also have the basic land package with 11 swamps, 7 islands, and 5 forests. We only ever need 1 green mana in the game so we can get our commander out, and the deck will run without the commander for as long as it really needs to, because the commander is just there as a win more card. The deck is built to function with or without that commander out, and even if we can't get the 6th Doctor out, we can put Vizalor on the battlefield and start using him to draw cards at the cost of our life, but still drawing cards. And if he becomes too much for us to handle, remember, you do have ways to get him off the board. You can even exile him with Altar of Baal to get another card out if you don't have one of your basic sack outlets out. You can make sure this card doesn't kill you if you really need to draw into that green mana. But remember, we've got Mirror Convert, we've got Command Sphere, Scampering Surveyor, Bonder's Ornament. All of these cards can get any color mana out of our deck, and we are running heavier on our ramp section than we normally would. So that was my 6th Doctor quote deck. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy summoning a ton of Necrons on the board and doing so for way less money than even the actual Necron precon costs. We managed to get the cost of this deck down to a grand total of $15.19, with 20 of those pennies being dedicated to the commander and his partner. So hopefully you end up enjoying this particular deck, grabbing it off, not the shelf so much, though realistically you could build this by cramming 2 precons together, but even that costs you 4 or 5 times more than what I've managed to build the deck for here. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everybody, I love your commander suggestions, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.